Hello everyone, we should be for away. Please give me a 1 in the comments if we are live and streaming. And yes, I believe we are. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I'm going to assume we're going through fine. So welcome everyone and thank you very much for being here for this long delayed, thank you Veronica, for this long delayed MOONotheism update. I do need to finish this on my channel. Thank you guys for the confirmation. We have lots of people here tonight again, and thank you very much. Well, when I say lots, I mean people I really appreciate. I've seen a new name, Damian Kuzmic. Hello there, Cogito. Thank you very much. Always providing some very interesting insights. Marian, Gran Bruheim, thank you. Happy New Year, and hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas. We've got Mare Sui, Islam Interovadad, Daduza, thank you. Good to see you. He never returned as a horse. And Dragon, thank you very much for your support. Always very much appreciated. We have Marek, Dobry wieczór, Marek, and Sergeant Grinch, and Veronica. And Katie, Native Sister, thank you very much. Good to see you. So nice to have you here. And another name, new name, Remy Winter, thank you. Good to see you. And Adol Cole. Are you familiar with the Sumerian mythology? Just in terms of what I've been researching for this series, I wouldn't call myself an expert, and no, no push-up, Sergeant Grinch. No, I sometimes I reference just what I need, and I go a little bit beyond it for some context, but I often have to have the notes in front of me to be sure that I'm correctly saying what I want to. Okay, so let me jump into where I want to go. So tonight we're talking about MOONotheism. So we're looking at the origin of Islam from its original pagan roots, and then with its very strong Gnostic influences as well as its heretical influences. So let me go to. Okay, we're looking at Tema. Now Tema. So this is the region that we're looking at, and Tema is here. This is Arabia. This is Tema here. This is Mecca down here in the middle of Arabia on the western side. Right, so this is the area around Mecca. That's Medina, and this is Tema here. Right, so to get back to where we were. So we're looking at Tema, Sin, or Shin, and the Hadramaut. The Hadramaut is this area down here. This is Yemen. So Hadramaut is in Yemen. Now, Tema's position may have forced or stimulated the other town states. So just like in Europe and in Greece and so on, Rome, they had city-states originally. They had town-states in this part of the world. And oddly enough, like within Yemen, which was dominant for a very long period, for 1,000 years nearly, they didn't have much by way of nomadism. They actually had a strong agricultural farming community with good cities. So the other town states of the Oasis of Arabia deserta were stimulated to partake to some degree in the civilizations of the surrounding countries. So, in other words, having Babylon, having Iran, Persia, and so on, and all these other countries having trade with India, having trade with China, even having trade with Greece and Rome, all of these ideas flowed through these trade networks into this country. And so, obviously, they adopted gods. In fact, gods were often interchangeable, they would switch them out and so on, right? So, so they partook to some degree in the civilizations of the surrounding countries in the northeast, the northwest, and the south, while trying to preserve or re-establish their independence. See, I made a typo on independence. Okay, so that's in the Encyclopaedia of Islam, Volume 1, page 883. Now, what is interesting is that there were many, many scripts. Writing was common. Of course, during the Islamic era, this called the Jahiliyyah, Mo couldn't write, and suddenly all of these records disappeared. But really, these were literate cultures. So different scripts were used and developed. Even the clansmen of the nomadic tribes knew how to write, according to the Encyclopedia of Islam. So even the nomadic tribes. Now, how is it that Muhammad and his tribe didn't have writing when for 1,000 years prior to the rise of Islam, in fact, for more than 1,000 years, from roughly 1,000 BC, 800 BC, writing was commonplace because these traders all knew how to write. Now, there are several important archaeological sites on the Arab-Persian Gulf, and they tell us, as in the north of the Hejaz, a large proportion of surviving documents are written in Aramaic. Then, of course, you've got Aramaic was the mother tongue of part of the population. If you've been watching Murad's episodes and you've been listening to Jay Smith and so on and Mal, then you'd know that Aramaic was very important. In fact, it's becoming more and more important in the formation of the Quran. And what is very, very fascinating is that I'm also now discovering that Aramaic does underlie the Quran. In fact, Aramaic starts with the whole Gnostic influences and the heretical influences, and this makes its way into the Quran, which is obviously drawing upon a multitude of these heretical references written in Aramaic. So Aramaic was the mother tongue of part of the population, especially the elites, which definitely would be literate, right, and educated. A large number of Aramaic-speaking churchmen and religious authors in the Nestorian church came from the Gulf, right? So there you've got this religious connection to Aramaic, even in the Gulf, not just in Syria. And the Sabaeans had their independent text too. That is true. That is correct. So the text in Sabaean script, speak of the devil, were relatively common. In the Gulf, as in the north of the Hijaz, texts in foreign languages such as Akkadian, Imperial Aramaic, Nabatean, Greek, and Latin are common. This is the slide where I left off the last time. So then, of course, you've got in southern Arabia, there are 5 inscriptions in Ge'ez, which is classical Ethiopian, okay, classical Ethiopic, 2 in Hebrew. So Hebrew was around. 3 Sabaic Nabatean bilinguals and a Greek-Latin one. 1 inscription in Greek, 1 in Nabatean, and 1 in Palmyrenian. So there were a host of languages in this region. This was a highly literate region and obviously highly traded. So lots of ideas flowed through this. And of course, you can add there was graffiti in Greek, in Nabatean, Palmyrenian, and there were Indian and Ge'ez graffiti in a cave on Socotra. Let's go have a look at where is Socotra. Socotra, let's have a look at the island of Socotra. And this is Socotra right here. I've actually never been. I wanted to go. Friends of mine went. I should have gone when I had the opportunity. So this is Socotra here. So trade happened, and of course we were just told that you had Indian and Ge'ez graffiti in Socotra. All right, so now, Mal, thank you very, very much. I'm really grateful. I do appreciate that. Thank you. The Nabateans were pseudo-Christianized due to proximity. You know, so St. Paul ended up in Nabatea. He ended up apparently in Petra, but he was in Nabatea. He was preaching without a license or something of that nature. So when he returns to Damascus, the king of Nabatea sends assassins after him. That's mentioned within the New Testament. So he certainly was trying to promote Christianity within that region. This is well known. I actually discussed this yesterday on Thaddeus' channel on a show discussing the Gnostic origins of Islam. So let's continue. In the earlier polytheistic period, the Hadrami, that's the Hadramites, that's Yemen again in the south, the Hadrami pantheon shows a close similarity to other South Arabian areas, dominated by the astral triad of moon, sun, and the Venus star. Johannes, dag sê, lyk my hier gaan dinge lekker, nee, gaan baie lekker. Ons gaan nou braai. Ons gaan nou braai. So, yeah, except that the moon god in Hadramaut bore the distinctive name Shin, borrowed from the Babylonian religion. Now, this is interesting because Babylon is here, right? This region is sort of Babylon out here, right? And these guys are all the way down here, but they share basically the same religion. They've changed the names of the gods, but it's the same practice, right? They believe in the same god. They've changed the names and so on, but yeah, it's exactly the same religion. So these guys share the Babylonian religion, and these guys conquered possibly all the way up to here, up towards Petra. They at least conquered up to this section of the desert here, around Tamar. And of course, the Babylonian king went all the way down to Mecca, at least Medina, but there's records apparently down in Mecca. So these guys mixed because they each controlled at least half of this part of the world, right? Johannes, ja bro, braai die duivel se boude. Okay, ja, zo'n lekker braai. Okay, the successes of the Akkadians, right? So, let's continue. So, the Yemeni religion, these were pagans, moon worshippers, and Yemen would be the source of where Islam came from. Originally, from its pagan origins, its pagan roots, as we've discussed, is the same as the Babylonian religion. So he is commonly referred to as Sin of Ilm. The root word of Islam is Essalem, okay, Islam. And it has been conjectured that the latter term is the name of the principal shrine of this deity, right? So, Sin of Ilm. Now, these, as well as these Arabian languages, there's a number of foreign tongues were in use in this land. So Arabian wasn't the only language. So there was mixing and sharing of ideas, and obviously then sharing of religious ideas, right? So there's a handful of Akkadian documents in this one, some Greek texts of the Hellenistic period, even found in Bahrain, a few Greek and even Latin rock inscriptions. It is only the Aramaic language, together with its script, that is attested with any frequency. Again, evidence of a lot of Aramaic, right? And if Aramaic does underlie the Quran, then this is further corroboration of the work put forward by Mal, by Murad, Saint Murad. And they speak here of Nabatean and Palmyrene influence. And in East Arabia, as is proven by a growing corpus of texts, they are finding new materials on a variety of materials such as coins, bronze plaques, and potsherds, by the surviving correspondence in the Aramaic dialect known as Syriac between the church authorities in Babylonia and East Arabian clergy. So now we've got these connections. I want to bring up one more reference that may be of interest. This is in the Encyclopaedia of Islam, Volume 1. This is in the PDF, it's page 942. It must be emphasized that South Arabia was represented by Sabah. Sabah, let's have a look at that again. That is this area down here, Sabah, Yemen today. South Arabia is represented by Sabah since at least the 10th century, that's BC. So, okay, More Sui. Yeah, I've been to Bahrain a few times. So it was a country with numerous and farming population. So that a lot of people had a farming population. And it was with but little and unimportant nomadism. So they weren't just uneducated country bumpkins. They weren't just nomads. They were actually a civilized country, at least according to the standards of the day, right? And a country that produced aromatic goods, especially frankincense. And this is even mentioned biblically in Exodus 30, 1 Kings 10, Isaiah 60, Jerome 6, and according to J. Rickmans in 1958. And South Arabia certainly introduced, Jeremiah certainly introduced Indian and East African wares to its ports. So we know that they brought knowledge from India. Now, of course, this would explain some of the, I haven't touched on this and I haven't gone into any depth, but from the evidence I've seen, from what I've looked at, it definitely seems to be a strong Indian influence within Islam as well, because that region had strong cultural ties and trading ties with India. KJ Hamilton, welcome. Right, so it must have already monopolized the traffic on the incense roads. And notice this here. Now, this is something very, very interesting. Okay, they speak on the strength of Sabah in the 8th to 6th centuries. This is BC, right? So these people had a very powerful grip on the economy as traders. But perhaps the Chaldeans lived in Oman. Okay, let's have a look at where's Oman. This is Oman. I've been to Oman many times. I've traveled all throughout Oman. I've been through, it's an amazing place. Very friendly people, actually, at least. So this was Oman here, right? So they say that the Chaldeans could have lived in Oman, possibly, right? So don't forget, the Chaldeans are supposed to be up here, right? The Chaldeans are supposed to be up here in Iraq. Perhaps the Chaldeans lived in Oman in those periods and mediated between Sabah and Mesopotamia and India before they occupied Mesopotamia, which is really interesting. Historically, that must be of relevance. This is where the Chaldean kings begin in 625 BC. So the Ur of the Chaldees would have a strong influence based on what was happening here in this part of the world, next to Yemen, right next to Yemen, where they were trading, where they were sailing all the way to India. So this is a very interesting connection that I wasn't aware of. So this could have implications. Katie, well, thank you. She said, I really enjoy research, Archive Lloyd. I use it a lot to my advantage. I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you very much. Yeah, let me show you guys something that you may find of use. This is software that, thanks to the donations that I've received, I pay a license for the software. I have it on 2 computers, so I have to have 2 licenses, plus the additional add-ons that I needed to get annually. But so it's about to expire in 17 days. I need to renew my license. But for instance, this is called, now it's got its annoyances. This is called Copernic Desktop Search. Now, what you do is you tell it to archive, you give it the location of the PDF archive that you have, and then you tell it to index. Now, in the case of the archive size that I have, it takes about 8 to 12 hours to index all of those documents. And occasionally you've got to do a fresh reindex, which takes a couple of hours. So this allows me to actually search through. So let's pick a term. Let's just pick the term Chaldean since we just saw it. So I've typed in Chaldean here. Unfortunately, the interface is 1995. I can't make any changes. The fonts are microscopic, and the second screen is 1.5 meters from me. So yeah. So notice I've typed in Chaldean, and it's brought up all of these references where the word Chaldean is found. Okay. So now I'm going to tell it to. I mean, you can. So I'll just pick a PDF. I'm just going to go here, Simon Magus, Ernest Martin, just a random choice. So I've just clicked on this book, and it's now brought up for me Chaldean. So in the first search, it brought up all the references that I have, which in this case is 157 documents that have the word Chaldean. And here we've got the references, and I can click through this, and this allows me to search through this. So then if I find a reference that is useful to me, for instance, I don't know, so Magus or whatever, find a word that you think is useful, I can then go back. I can search for different words here within this document, and I can look for something else. So if I want to find, I don't know, I'll just pick a random term, Cyrene. So here we go. I've got 89 documents that have the word Cyrene in them. And if I go here to, okay, I'll call this one Battling the Gods, Atheism in the Ancient World. There we go. There's Cyrene. And I can search through additionally because there's a few more references here I can see. So this allows me to search very rapidly. So you might find it useful to search the archive. So as I said, this is going to take like up to 12 hours to index the archive. And once it's done that, it's got a database that searches, and it allows me to very quickly index and find through all of these things. Okay. So, but I'm glad that that resource is helpful to you. Okay, so this is a very interesting cultural, historical connection, right? That the Chaldeans lived in Oman because, and this is relevant to Abraham because the Muslims claim that they reject Christianity, and obviously they reject Judaism. They claim that Abraham was not a Jew. Abraham was not a Christian. He did not follow the God of the Bible. He, at least the religions as we know them, they claim that he followed the original religion of Abraham, which was prior to him, which was not the story that we tell us in Christianity. So it's interesting that the Jews actually state that Abraham was a Sabaean. Right? The Sabaeans, as you'll know, lived here. The Sabaeans lived here in Yemen. They claim that Abraham's religion was Sabaeanism. This is the very same religion. Now, if these guys who were next door, who have followed the same religion, if they took over Iraq, Mesopotamia at the time, then it would have been very easy for this religion to travel up and for Abraham to adopt that religion. So he's from exactly, but Ur of the Chaldees, right? They speak of the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans were here. Right? The religion that Abraham followed was here. So the Jews state that Abraham worshipped this religion, and that's present-day Iraq. Yes. Right. So, all right, let's continue. So that's a useful reference there. Okay, let me continue. So Haran, home of the patriarchs. So where's Haran? Haran is up here. Right. Haran is up here north, Turkey. Just on the border of Syria, right here. So just north of Iraq, just north of the border of Syria. That's Haran here, right? And this is, of course, mentioned in relation to Abraham. All right, so let's continue. This is, okay, so a village of Haran exists in Turkey today on top of the ancient one from the Old Testament period. Found near Haran are villages that bear the names of Abraham's great-grandfather and his grandfather, Serug and Nahor. These are from Genesis 11:22 to 26, and Haran was the father of Lot. Oddly enough, Genesis 11:27. The cities of Ur and Haran both had the moon god as their main deity. Interestingly, the Yemenis, of course, had the moon god as their main deity. Right? And it was the same religion as that of Babylon. Terah, the father of Abraham, worshipped other gods in Joshua 24:2, and he moved his family from Ur to Haran. That's in Genesis. And Arabia and all the princes of Kedar, they were the merchants of thy hand. Merchants obviously took ideas with them as much as they took goods. In lambs and rams and goats, in these were they thy merchants. The traffickers of Sheba. Sheba is, of course, what we now call Saba, right? Or Saba, that's down here. That would be Yemen. This is where the Queen of Sheba, according to that story, comes from. This area here. So the traffickers of Sheba and Rama, they were thy traffickers. They traded for thy wares with the chief of all spices, and with all precious stones and gold. And it mentions here Haran and Canaan and Eden, the traffickers of Sheba. Ashur was as thine apprentice in traffic. These locations are in northern Mesopotamia, right? Sheba. Now, Sheba is in the south. So there was trade. So now we know that there was trade all the way from here, all the way to there. However they got the goods, be it by land, right? Be it by sea, and then up here, up the river, or by sea, and then here, inland as much as possible, and across through here, and then across here. So whatever it is, even biblically, the evidence is that they were trading, they were sharing ideas. So there was a connection. Rick, soldier of God, welcome. All right, so now let's continue. They mentioned it seems to be of great importance for the cultural and religious development of the Arabs, quote unquote, right? That Nabonidus, now he was the king of Babylon, he was the last king of Babylon, that he conquered Tamar in 550 BC. Tamar, as we mentioned, is north of Mecca. He conquered Tamar in 550 BC and he made an expedition as far as Yathrib, known as Medina today. There's evidence he may have gone even further south. He built a palace and temple in Tamar and made this place the center of a religion and cult around the Aramean moon god Shin. So, at least half of Arabia and all of Mesopotamia was conquered by this guy, Nabonidus, and he brought this worship down into Arabia. Perhaps with the sun disk resting, so with the sun disk resting in the crescent as the main symbol of this religion. Now, of course, Islam has the crescent and the star, right? But here they've got the sun disk and the star, and other times you'll see but it's exactly the same symbol as the Muslims use today. Now, this guy says here in the Encyclopaedia of Islam, there should be investigations on the close resemblances between this cult and that of South Arabia, and also Ethiopia. Shin was the state god of Hadramaut. Interesting, so Shin was the god of Nabonidus of Mesopotamia, but Shin was also the state god of Hadramaut, right here next to Yemen. Yemen's right there. Sorry, Oman is right there. This is Yemen. This is Sabah. This is Hadramaut. Shin was the state god of Hadramaut since the earliest inscriptions of this state. So hopefully we've established some ideas here. All right, let's continue. From Terah to the god Al-Makkah. Now, Elam is the name given to the moon by the southern Hebrews. Variants of Elam were Erah, Etera, Ilmakkah, Jerah, Shahar, and Terah. So interestingly, the name Terah, right, given to the moon is a name given to the moon. So it's related to the moon god. So Abraham's father would have been a worshiper of the moon god. His name is influenced by the moon god. We have Yem, the Babylonian sea god killed by Baal with two clubs fashioned by Qatar-Wahasis, called Driver and Expeller. Now it's interesting that when you look up, there's a reference that I cannot find. I found it once and I cannot find it again. I did not make a record of it and I cannot find it again, but it's a discussion about the origin of the name of the country of Qatar. And of course, when you look for the origin, there is basically no record. They'll tell you, well, it's got something to do with water or something to do with the sea, and no one really knows where the term Qatar comes from, of course, except that the name Qatar is the name of a pagan god, right? And he made two weapons called Driver and Expeller, and with Driver he was struck on the body and driven from his throne. With Expeller he was struck on the head and driven from the seat of his authority. So the Babylonian sea god was killed by Baal with two clubs fashioned by Qatar-Wahasis. So something to do with the sea. The Babylonian sea god was killed by weapons made by the god Qatar. So he would have been a maker god of a lower tier, and then Baal, of course, would have been of the higher pantheon, right? So Terah means ibex, which in ancient times was a well-known moon symbol. That's the ibex here. So this was a well-known moon symbol on account of the ibex's curved horns. Egerton Sykes wrote that Terah was a theophoric name. Terah, ancient Semitic name for the moon, equated with Terah, father of Abraham. The moon was known as Etera and Jerah. Okay, so we know that now Abraham's father's name is something to do with moon worship. Al-Makkah, or just Makkah. Have any of you heard of a city in Arabia called Makkah? Never heard of one myself, but the main god of the region was a moon god called Makkah, and his symbol was a crescent and a star, right? So his symbol was a crescent, with a little round thing inside it. Can't think of any similarities, and if you guys can. So Al-Makkah is called the master of the ibex, or lord of the ibexes. He was the chief god. Abraham's younger brother was named after the city Haran in Turkey. Haran was the ancient city of the moon, oddly enough. So Haran is the city of the moon. So the name Haran seems to have become a theophoric name synonymous with the moon god, Sin. So now we've got this entire region, all the way from here, right, to here, all the way up here. So this entire region was worshipping the moon god, Sin. All of this is connected. All the evidence points at that. Now, the temple of Bilqis, the queen of Sheba, was a moon god temple, which fact misled the Arabs to think that Solomon's god Yahweh must be a moon god. Because Solomon, obviously, and the queen of Sheba are related in a legend, right? And because now her temples were here. She had temples here and related temples here in Africa as well, in Ethiopia. So she had temples here and temples all in this region. So because of this, they thought that Solomon worshipped the moon god. That's why they think Christianity, the God of the Bible and the God of the Quran are the same God. So Allah is the God moon, correct? Yeah, Allah originally is the pagan moon god, and then of course they've slapped some Gnostic source on it. So Baal was enthroned over other Arabian tribal deities due to the Babylonian conquest. Now, yeah, lots of these ideas were fluid. They changed a lot, right? Some things were some ideas stayed and some ideas were fluid. Is there some connection with moon god and Hindu god? I would say there must be some connection. I have not looked into Hinduism. I do believe strongly that the evidence shows that Islam certainly took ideas from Hinduism, that it borrowed from Hinduism and plagiarized. So that is definitely, I think, the case. I just haven't spent the time to look into that. What I have examined tells me that there is a connection. The whole Shiva Lingam thing, there is a connection into Islam. Now, there's a mention here of Baal as Hubal, okay, and that is true. Now, let me make a note here. Now, I need to be very careful here because I don't have the notes in front of me. So when I speak off the cuff, I tend to sometimes make mistakes because I misremember or I misspeak. So we're all familiar with Baal, okay? Now we're going to look at Baal a little bit closer, but Hubal or Hubal was, at the time that Muhammad was a boy, was the Allah of the Kaaba. Allah just means the God, right? Who is the Allah of the Kaaba? Well, the Allah of the Kaaba was called Hubal, right? So that was the Allah of the Kaaba. Now, remember, Mo was consecrated to Hubal by his grandfather. His entire family worshipped Hubal. Hubal was the Allah. Allah is just a descriptor, the God, right? It's a generic descriptor. It's not a name. This is a name, a personal name of a God. So Allah, obviously they rolled all the gods into one, and they use this name as a personal name because they don't want to obviously make it obvious that their God is Hubal. Now, there are other gods as well. This is a pantheon of gods. So Hubal is still Baal. That's correct, Southern Grinch. Yeah, Hubal is still Baal. But we're gonna see a little bit of Baal soon as we go through. So hopefully this makes sense that because the temple of the Queen of Sheba was a moon god temple, this misled the Arabs to think that Solomon's god Yahweh must be a moon god, when of course this is not the case, and of course the Muslims inherited this idea. And notice this is an interesting book here, Religions on the Greco-Roman World, right? The city of the moon god, religious traditions of Haran, the city of the moon god. So Haran was the city of the moon god. That whole region was the city of the moon god. Let's have a look at mankind's original religion. They speak of this study treats the religious and intellectual history of the city of Haran, eastern Turkey, from biblical times down to the establishment of Islam. The author starts from the well-known reference in the Quran and the early Islamic histories to the people of Haran as Sabians. Now again, we should note there's a difference between the Sabians and the Sabaeans, right? So in Mecca, you had the Sabaeans. Sorry, in Yemen, you had the Sabaeans, but they obviously know the Jews. If you look in the Talmud, they state that Abraham was a Sabaean, originally a Sabaean. He then, of course, abandoned this religion and went and he adopted Yahwism. He became a follower of Yahweh, right? Then, of course, you have the Sabians. The Sabians, now this is a tricky one, but the Sabians seem to be Ebionites. Before they were Ebionites, they were the Alchasai, or the Alkasites, right? The Alkasai or Alchasites, Alkasai. And of course, in between, so the Sabians seem to be the Sabians, then it looks like they were also, to some degree, This is a bit more complex than I would like it to be, but so the Sabians seem to be related somewhat to the Manichaeans, and then before that, they were related to the Ebionites and the Al-Kasai. So these guys eventually went defunct, but they passed on their knowledge to the Ebionites. And of course, out of the Al-Kasai, which were still around at the time of the Manichaeans, you get the Manichaeans who came out of the Al-Kasai, and then you've got the Sabians. There's some link, there's some similarity between these guys. These are a heretical Jewish Christian sect, right? But they're also Gnostics. So bear that in mind. These are a Gnostic, occult, Judeo-Christian, weird heresy. The Mandeans, okay, so the Mandeans are supposed to today be the survivors, the descendants of the Manichaeans and the Sabians. So that would be the idea. The Mandeans would be the Sabians. And but that's a story for another day. I've got a lot of notes on that. I need to cover that. I started on that, in fact, last night on Thaddeus' channel. So look on Reasoned Answers. I did a show last night. Did about 90 minutes, and then I did hour 20, and then we just did an open sort of chat. Have a look at that. I cover some of that. This is the Gnostic origins of Islam. Now I'm doing the pagan origins of Islam. So, Big Yehuda, MOONotheism, detraction. Well, thanks for coming. Have a nice day. So, all right. Now, so what you have is the author starts from the well-known references in the Quran and the early Islamic histories to the people of Haran as Sabians, one of the peoples of the book. Because, as I said, they were a Gnostic heresy. They were a Judeo-Christian heresy. But that's a story for a different time, right? The author unravels strands of religious tradition in Haran that run from the old Semitic planetary cults through Hellenistic Hermeticism. This would come from the Egyptian mystery religions, Gnosticism and Neo-Pythagoreanism, and Christian cults to esoteric Islamic sects such as the Sufis and the Shiites. So there's a lot of mixing going on, right? A huge amount of mixing that is happening. Right? So next, the Sabians of Haran in the classical tradition by David Pingree, he calls it the city of the moon. They speak of astrology and astral magic. Now, of course, the Sabians originally, well, the Al-Kasai as well as the Ebionites, they believed in astrology and, of course, astral magic. And they speak here of, it is further shown that the Greek philosophical and scientific material available to them was mingled with elements from ancient Mesopotamia, India, Iran, Judaism, and Egypt. That would be the Egyptian mystery religion. India as well, oddly enough, right? And these guys, eventually, these ideas are adopted into Islam. In the other series, when I speak of the pagan, Gnostic origins of Islam, you will see that these Ebionite, Al-Kasai, whatever ideas, these Sabian ideas, and in fact, they're absorbed into Islam, right? You'll see that these ideas made their way directly into Islam because all of the stories that Islam tells in its theology, its Christian, its Christology is heretical. It's Gnostic. It's not orthodox, right? It comes from these traditions. But also, if you read through the Hadiths, Muhammad is a Sabi. They claim within the Hadiths that Muhammad was a Sabian. Understand? So his parents were Sabaeans, right? And eventually it looks like he made the switch. He became a Sabian. So now you have this idea of trying to blend paganism with Christianity by way of Gnosticism. Now notice here that these Sabians, right, they claim, so they form a syncretic system of belief, right? They mixed a whole bunch of things together, a soup of beliefs, and so that they could claim to be mankind's original and authentic religion, just like Islam claims. So these Sabians claimed to be mankind's original and authentic religion, exactly what Islam claims, and they claim that Abraham belonged to this religion. Abraham was not a Jew. Abraham would not follow Christianity, and that they follow the original religion of Abraham, mankind's original and authentic religion, which is this mishmash here. Right. So now the Sabians used Neoplatonism, okay, which is true because if you go into the scholars of Islam, you'll find that the scholars of Islam borrowed from the Neoplatonists. So yes, that happens to be true. Let me just see something here, what this guy said. So Big Yehuda, I don't know who this guy is, but he doesn't like the rhetoric. MOONotheism detracts me of credibility. I don't like the use of, so go tell Jay if you don't like the music. Right, moving on. The Quran says Abraham is Hanif. Hanif are the standing stones. Hanif are upright. Technically, a Hanif is upright. upright standing stones. Don't forget, the Bible tells Abraham, God tells Abraham, do not worship standing stones. Right. So, just a brief aside to the term El. El, Hebrew, El, okay, this is in Strong's Hebrew 410. It's an ancient Semitic term for deity. It's a term that is generic, okay? In Assyrian, it's Ilu, and in Ugaritic, it's Il. It's a generic word, like Allah, right? Generic. It's not a name, it's just a title. Generic word for God in the Semitic languages, used over 200 times in the Old Testament, often has a modifying term with it, but in Job and Psalms occurs alone. He was the chief and somewhat vague, shadowy god of the Canaanite pantheon. And the title is used in the Old Testament to express the exalted transcendence of God, which is a very different use within the Old Testament versus the pagan usage. So the Hebrews borrowed this word from the Canaanites. The linguistic derivation of the name is uncertain. Suggestions include roots that mean to be strong and to be in front of as a leader. The Canaanite god El was the father of human beings and of gods, called the father of mankind and father of years. He was, however, like the pagan gods, like the pagan pantheon, he was an immoral and debased character. The pagan gods were highly sexualized gods. They were just shagging everything that they could get their hands on, right? So here you've got a very, very much the same type of character, debased and immoral. It's a tribute to the high morality of the Old Testament understanding of God that a title that in Canaanite usage was so defiled could, without risk, be used to express the moral majesty of the God of Israel. Right? There's some sort of, I mentioned in the past, some passage where God says, look, this is my title. This does not belong to other gods. I am that God. So just as the word God in English can be used of the true God or a false God, so this word in Hebrew may refer to heathen gods, usually meaning idols. Because lots of people like to say that, oh, El is a pagan and therefore the Hebrew God of the Bible is pagan. Well, this word unfortunately cannot be used exclusively in that sense. Right? Sounds like the 70s in Every Turn As a Horse says, you know, you really should send me a message. We should chat one day. Please, let's do that. Okay, then of course, notice here that this word is also used in the Sabaean, in the Assyrian, the Nabatean, and the Sabian again. Okay, and then also in the Assyrian, it's Alatu. So if you look at Assyrian, Syria, Syriac, and so on, Alatu. So the term, so even their god was called Alatu, which is very similar to Allah. But the term El, which seems to be the root source of El, Allah, right? This has been used as a pagan designation for a long, long time, right? It's not used exclusively of the biblical God. Okay, let's continue. Notice these are forms and transliterations. There were numerous forms of this. But two of the forms of this, notice, are Baalim. Baalim. The term Baalim occurs in the Bible. Baalim, as in many Baals, multiple Baals. All right? And then, of course, you have here, let me just close that. And then, of course, you've got Baal, Hallel, Hilal. Hilal happens to be the crescent moon. Hilal is the crescent moon, the crescent symbol of Islam. So the crescent moon in Islam was a deity, it was a god. Its name was Hilal, El Hilal. Here you go. And then Ka'el, Kal. Okay, you had Kal as well. Kal happened to be a god that was god of this region. When these guys invaded here, they brought their god with them. So Kal also happened to be a god here. So that name El would have influenced that region as well. So Baal, Hubal, and Ateret. In Israelite religion, Yahweh replaced the great god El as Israel's god. Right? So they stopped being pagans and they decided to follow Yahweh. So that's Yahwism. And so El, is this the religion of Abraham, the original religion of Abraham? There's a probability of that. Right? Your Highness, I love how gentle Islam downright steals and plagiarizes. Of course it does. Okay. So in Judges 3:7, read that during Joshua's time, the Israelites did what was offensive to Yahweh. They ignored Yahweh, their God, and they worshipped Baalim, the plural of Baal, and Asherah, or Aterat, the plural of Asherah. Then, of course, the prophet Elijah asked King Ahab to summon on Mount Carmel 450 prophets of Baal and Asherah. And again, Asherah associated with the god Baal. This time, Asherah, Baalah, even has prophets, apparently about as many as Baal. Now here you've got Baal, the male figure, and you've got the female figure of Asherah. Asherah apparently also called Baalah. So the feminine of Baal is Baalah. Baalah. Is that coincidence or is that meaningful? That's a question. They should have had copyright. So Nicholas Sirpe says, Islam, I'm sure Mahomo plagiarized these myths too, as he did this Scandinavian myths, virgins in paradise. Of course he did. Yeah. Asherah is associated with Baal during the religious reform of King Josiah, when Josiah ordered the objects made for Baal and Asherah removed from the temple and burned. Then, of course, you've got the famous site of Ugarit on the Syrian coast, yielded a cache of 14th to 13th century BC cuneiform tablets. They're a primary source for understanding Canaanite religion. Okay, there are several ritual texts and several epic myths, and amongst the many gods who appear there are Atrat, the consort of the great god El. Atirat is the Ugaritic linguistic equivalent of the Hebrew Asherah, the Baalim, the Baalah, sorry. Qatar is an Indian dagger. That's, yeah. Okay, so now, more than once, different tribes here invaded this part of the world. Now you've got the Kindah, okay? Yemeni pagans called the Kindah actually invaded from here and took over at least this part of Arabia, which included here Mecca, right, where Mecca is today. They may have gone further up all the way to Petra. It's quite possible they went up a lot further, okay? But they at least controlled this area. So let's continue. So these ideas flourished, and they established themselves there for decades, if not centuries. Muslim sources agreed that Hadramaut was the original homeland of the tribe of Kindah, a nomadic offshoot of which founded the Central Arabian Kingdom of Kindah, the Kindat al-Muluk, where we get the term Malik. You've heard the name Abd al-Malik. It is not easy to trace the precise limit of the territories controlled by Himyar, by the Yemenis. There is no doubt, however, that it was almost the totality of Inner Arabia up to the vicinity of Lower Iraq and perhaps Palestine. So they controlled a lot of that region. The capital city still stands today, southeast of Makkah. So that city still exists. It's still in Arabia. It's a modern city today. The gods they worshipped include Kal-El. You might have seen Superman's father's called Kal-El, right? Where did they get that name, I wonder? And they had Attar al-Sharik and La. Heard of Allah? Anyone heard of Allah? There was a god called La. Al just means the in Arabic. Now you've got a god called La. Allah. So you figure it out. Then they speak of, okay, Sharik means rising from the east, an indirect reference to the sun. It is a Muslim name also mentioned in the Quran, which also means companion or partner. Well, because the moon has a partner, the sun. The sun is a partner, the moon. So Dodzer says, El, the Canaanite god, the god of the carnal world, material world, sounds like El the Ba'oth. Yeah, look, the Gnostic connections here, this is before the Gnostic period. I mean, I would say this is before the Gnostics at that time were sort of, you would call them Jewish Gnostics at that time. They were trying to do their best to reinterpret the Jewish texts, right? Because the Christian text didn't exist then. Cajun A. Hamilton says, would you ever consider putting this series in a download we could purchase? Yeah, you know, I have this on, it's on, it should be on multiple channels. So it's on Rumble, it's on Library, and it's also on a third one. So all of my videos are backed up onto 3 different channels. But, you know, everyone tells me to write a book. But yeah, maybe I could do that. You know, perhaps I could do that because, yeah, I mean, man, it would be great if I could actually, yeah, if this was something I could turn into a career that actually paid the bills, that would be great. Now, Aaron W. Hughes states that scholars are unsure. Okay, sorry. South Arabian inscriptions from the 4th to 5th century AD refer to a god called Rahman. This is important. This is very interesting. Rahman, the merciful one, who had a monotheistic cult and was referred to as the Lord of heaven and earth. Rahman, okay, who had a monotheistic cult. Now, this is the time of paganism, polytheism, right? Now, Aaron Hughes states that scholars are unsure whether Rahman, this god, developed from earlier polytheistic systems or developed due to the increasing significance of the Christian and Jewish communities. So there was a very strong Christian Jewish influence in that region, and in the future I'll be talking about that. I have a mountain of information on that. Good grief. An entire mountain I need to sift through still. I mean, at least make slides with. But we can state that he came from the Christian and Jewish tradition. All right. So now let's see. Rahman bin Muhammad. Okay. So you talk about the upper classes. They went over. So the upper classes of Arabia, so the upper classes of this region, went over to some form of monotheistic creed, according to the Encyclopaedia of Islam. They went over to a monotheistic creed, a cult of the merciful Rahmanan, the Lord of Heaven, which could best be described as Hanafite. See Hanif. Now, of course, I've discussed in the past that Allah is Hanifan, he is upright. But Hanifan, basically this means that technically this would be what Abraham was, Hanifan. Abraham was not a Jew. Abraham was not a Christian, according to the Muslims, of course. They rejected those religions, and they wanted to find the original religion of Abraham. Abraham was Hanif, right? Hanifan meant he was a pagan. He worshipped upright statues. He worshipped the pagan gods. He worshipped Baal, right? He worshipped the god Shin, the moon god Shin. So now you've got the Hanafites, which means that this would be a heretical Christian offshoot, a pseudo-biblical cult, right? It is devoid of explicit marks of either Judaism or Christianity. At the same time, already from the end of the 4th century, a few explicitly Jewish texts attest an influential Jewish presence, and in the 6th century, under Abraha, Christianity prevailed. So you've got this very strong Christian and Jewish influence, and they were still fighting at the time. There were the Jewish cults that were Jewish Messianic, and they saw Christianity as a Jewish movement, and of course you had the Christian movement, which said, no, we don't have to be Jews, right? Because their focus was on Jesus. So Arabia is a debated question, but Quran 53:49 calls God the Lord of Sirius, which is very interesting. Allah, the Lord of Sirius. Now, the Lord of Sirius, this was a well-known pagan god in the region at the time. The South Arabian deity Wad is mentioned in the Quran, so he is in East Africa, right? And of course, the new monotheistic god, oddly enough, is called Rahmanan in ancient South Arabian. So now you've got a new monotheistic god that, Roman, thank you very much. I'm really grateful. Thank you. Thank you. It's really kind. So if you have any questions, please post them. And yep, so what we have, let me just go back to live chat. For some reason, I lost that. Okay, now. So what you have is, so Roman said Rahman can be Gnostic, Christian, fake Jesus. Well, they made it into one, of course. As you can see, it was described as Hanafite. So they obviously took the name. So Christianity was rising. You had this monotheistic god, this Christian god that was very popular. So the pagan Gnostics, which is a syncretism of these two, or symbiosis of these two ideas, they needed to find a matching god to compete with because they were losing adherents. The pagans were losing adherents. So now let's look at the origin of Rahman. Don't forget, it's one of the names of Allah, right? So the new monotheistic god is called Rahmanan in ancient South Arabian and is often described as the Lord of Heaven and Earth, and the Quranic name Al-Rahman is probably related to that. One interesting inscription ends after mentioning Rahmanan with the phrase Rabhad bin Muhammad, which is translated as by the Lord of the Jews, by the highly praised. Now, there is an inscription related to, as we mentioned, let me just go back a second here. Notice we mentioned Abraha, he of the elephants that attacked Mecca, right? He was a Christian. He was Ethiopian. So he comes from the Oriental Orthodox Church, right? From the Tawahedo Church. Let me just bring up my notepad. So what people are not aware of is that, so let me continue here. So everyone knows about the Tawhid of Islam, right? The oneness of Allah, right? Being the monad, being this, right? That term comes from the Ethiopic, from the Tawahedo Church. Oops. Comes from the Tawahedo Church. That term the Muslims took from the Gez, from the Ethiopic, the Tawhid, Tawahedo. This means the unity of God, right? The unity of God. Don't forget, Allah is supposed to be a unity. They mention Ahad, one of, right? One of what? And of course, Muslims will deny this whole day, every day. But this term is taken from the Ethiopians. And don't forget, a group of Muslims spent something like 15 years amongst the Ethiopians, right? In the very first Hijrah. So that is Neoplatonism, the monad. Yes, no, Islam definitely drew from the Neoplatonics. Most explicitly they did. I need to cover that in the future, but there is a very strong connection between Islam and Neoplatonism. A very, very strong connection. It's undeniable. They've most explicitly taken from that. So notice though, but the Lord of the Jews, who is the Lord of the Jews? God Yahweh. So who is Rahman? Well, it happens to be Yahweh, because the Christians at that time called Yahweh Rahman. That was one of the names of God for the Christians. God was Rahman. Understand? So the Muslims stole the name and applied it to Allah. And notice, Rab bin Muhammad, by the Lord of the Jews, by the highly praised. Rabhad is by the Lord of the Jews, Rab Yahud, okay, Yahud, the Jews, the Yahudi, right? So you've got the Lord of the Jews, okay, Rabbah Yahud bin Muhammad. Muhammad is the highly praised. By the Lord of the Jews, by the highly praised. Now you had lots of Christianized Jews, right? You had lots of Messianic Jews that thought that they needed to be Jewish, but they still followed Christ. Remember we mentioned earlier the Sabians, the Ebionites, the Altricites. These were Jewish movements that followed Christ. So you've got this whole mixture, but now you've got, don't forget, by the Lord of the Jews, Yahweh, by the highly praised. Muhammad here is God. So they've taken the name of God, which the Christians were using, and applied it to Muhammad. And this is where you get the origin of Muhammad. So yeah, let me just check the notice. Johannes says the info our brother is giving us comes from reputable sources, in many cases from the Muslim sources themselves. No one knows about it because for centuries Muslims tried to hide it, and they did. But yeah, I'm using lots of, like, I don't necessarily name every source, but notice I didn't type this up myself. These are taken largely from major academic papers, well-known scholars, and of course from the Encyclopedia of Islam. Your Highness, I was partisan, and everybody thought I was a dude. I had fun letting everyone think so until I finally added my portrait. Oh, okay, interesting. Look, lots of Muslim apologists are females, and they won't admit it. Like Alonzo Harris is a chick. Trust me on that. Alonzo Harris is female. 0786 AHA, female. She admits it now, but female. So several of them are actually female. They try too hard to be guys. So yeah, they're running out of guys, and they have these women. You can see the whole language pattern, the whole argumentativeness is different to guys. You called himself the standing one. Yes, I've mentioned that before, but hold on. Maybe let me try and find you this page that might be useful to you. I need to just determine where I am so that I don't lose my place here. Okay, 96. So let me try and find you this slide so that I can bring it up for you. Yeah, sorry about the dead space. I just want to find this reference so we can just clarify. And here we go. These are upright stones. This is a 9,000-year-old shrine in Jordan, a Silim, okay? Silim is also the root of Islam, right? Don't forget, the term SLM is also the root of the phrase, of the word Islam. This is Jibal al-Kashabiyya. French and Jordanian archaeologists made a unique discovery that sheds new light on daily life and belief in the prehistoric Levant. These are graven idols, and pillar statues. Abraham was forbidden to worship graven idols and pillar statues. Don't forget, and these are an example of what was worshipped at that time. So yeah, from the Neolithic period. So okay, now let me go forward again so that I get back to where I was, and you guys can enjoy my picture there of the polar bear that's napping. Okay, so that is Hanifan. That is an upright pillar. That's Hanifan, upright. Okay, so they were upright. So when the Muslims said they were upright, they meant upright pillars. So yeah, Sergeant Grinch, he's a very persistent troll. That is very true. But the thing is, they're on the run. They have no idea how to respond to the information I'm putting out. They have no clue. I mean, have you seen any one of them ever bring evidence from the Sharia to refute me, to say, no, Lloyd is wrong because he's quoted page 6 and he should have quoted page 5, and it actually says on page 10 if you look at it, because they can't. It's illegal for them to do that. So yeah, they don't, right? I've invited every single one of these butt wipes to meet with me on a stream, and they've never done so. They've never done so. In 3 or 4 years now, I've been inviting them. Please, let's meet. Let's have a chat. Let's just go through the Sharia and read it. It's the perfect law of Allah. Nothing to worry about. It's perfect law. It's great law. It's fantastic. We all want it. Let's have a look. Never. Hit and run polemics. Yeah. Don't forget, I've invited, on 2 occasions, I invited Alfonso to meet with me to discuss the Sharia. On both occasions, they ran away. Right? On both occasions, she did not show up at the stipulated time. Right? Of course, the same happened with Thaddeus, who invited her on, Mary, Adam Seeker, and Steve, as well as Steve. Okay, Steve Mashni. So, yeah, runs away. Just yeah, so what do you say to that? Yeah, I love the images. Proof they were stoned. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So moving on here. I don't know how much time. Okay. So notice. So the Sumafaya inscription ends with the invocation in the name of Rahmanan and of his son, the conquering Christ. Okay. Now it gets more interesting. So, Kaijun Hamilton, it's because you wiped the floor with him. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. I think they know that. But notice now. Now suddenly this next reference gives us even more information, right? Yes, so it says Silva Mubashir says Titus 2:11 to 14 shows that Jesus is the Al Rahman. And what does this inscription tell us? This inscription in Arabia says, in the name of Rahmanan and of his son, the conquering Christ. It's Bismillah Rahman. Don't we have something in Islam that says Bismillah al Rahman al Rahim, right? So they've got something very similar, Bism Rahman and Christos. So Rahman has to be God because Christos is Jesus. So yeah, so they simply plagiarized from Christianity. Christianity was present in that region in the 3rd century. Don't forget, the Ethiopians had an entire Bible. While there was no evidence of an early Arabic Bible before the 800s or whatever, there was possibly one. There is a story that says the one was translated. Someone paid a Syriac Christian, right, who probably was a little bit heretical, to translate the Bible into Arabic from the Syriac, right? So there's a story about that, but we don't know if it happened, right? There's no evidence that it did happen, but the Ethiopians had it, and they would recite it. They would speak it every day. Muhammad used to listen to these Ethiopians recite the Bible. It was paraphrased, never actually physically translated. Wow, Ben Yosef, welcome. It's been a long time. So good to see you. Happy New Year. Really nice to see you again. Thank you for stopping by. So now Abraha invaded Mecca with his elephants, right? With the elephant called Mahmud or Muhammad, right? The white elephant called Muhammad that wouldn't invade Mecca. So Abraha's inscription contains equally clear formulas. The most significant is this inscription, which begins with the power, the help, and the mercy of Rahmanan and of his Messiah and of his Holy Spirit. This is an inscription by Abraha. And it says here, Rahman, Mashiach, and then Ruach, right? And recounts a Christian celebration. So the Rahman was God. So when the Muslims are talking about Rahman, they're either talking about God and somehow they went off the rails, way off track, or B, they deliberately plagiarized, they appropriated the name and created a fake religion. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. The archaeology, the inscriptions are very, very clear. Rahman was originally a name used by the Jews and Christians for God. Because obviously, and God here is a trinity. Did the elephant have white shins? Of course it did, villains. It was a white elephant and it refused to attack Mecca. Right. I covered that story. Now, the term Molech, Moloch, MLK, Malik. Okay. So Melech, Malik, Abdal Malik. Now we know about the Abdal Malik. And great to see you as well. Sorry for the absence. Yeah, well, good to have you back. So this is derived from the follower of Baal, servant or slave of Baal, the Karabal. So the term Malik is derived from the follower of Baal, one who is the servant. What is the Abdal Malik? The slave of Malik. Okay, who is Malik? Moloch, right? You're the servant or slave of Baal. So Malik is effectively Baal. So now, look, things get a little fuzzy because, man, this whole region, things are a little fuzzy, you'll notice. As always, Muhammad was lost and put everything here in the Quran without the real knowledge. Yes, exactly. So, Dragon Daenerys is either new or actually has a problem with me. Please recognize the such thing. Dragon, yeah, Farish is well known to me. I've known him for about a year now. He's on the channel, so he tends to have a lively sense of humor, so he's okay. So yeah, please don't take exception to him. You know, Farish has been very supportive and helpful in the channel. So yeah, so thank you very much for the help you're giving. But yeah, Farish, yeah, maybe just tone it down a little bit if whatever's happening in the comments. So I'm a mod at the Holy Humanist. Yeah. Okay. So anywho, moving on. Okay. The name derives from combining the consonants of the Hebrew melech, king, with the vowels of boshet, shame. So the king of shame, something humiliating, something, an abomination, if you want to think of it that way. The baby eater, correct, Adel Cole. Okay, so he has a bull head. Notice the bull head is associated, as I've covered in the series. I know I'm way behind on this, but the whole symbol of Islam, this bull head, this is part and parcel of Islam as well. The crescent, the bull head. Okay. The root is Malek or Muluk or Adramelech, another ancient god that happens to have the same sort of name. These names are all linked. Okay, they might have different names, but often the same gods. So modern scholars have proposed that Molech may be the same god as Milcom, Adad Milki, an epithet for Baal. And of Allah's 99 names, you happen to have Malik al-Muluk, the king of the kingdom. Fascinating. So Malik, right, Baal al-Muluk is one of the names of Allah. It's interesting. Yesterday I showed that Allah has 99 names, but Muhammad has 201. So, did Muhammad have white shins? Of course Muhammad had white shins. Now, King Solomon was also led astray by the third of the favorite pagan gods of the land, Molech, to whom he raised an altar near Jerusalem. So God warned him twice not to, and in punishment, his heir would be deprived of 10 of the tribes of his great kingdom. Molech was also the god of the Ammonite peoples. His name seems to be tied to the Hebrew word Melech, which means king, which in turn suggests he was an older god, perhaps the Akkadian deity. Got a typo of deity there. Mulek. So like Baal, his cult may have also been transported to Carthage, where he was worshipped as the god Molech, until the servants of the Olympian gods pulverized ancient Carthage. But now this also gets more interesting. Let's have a look. Who is Malik? So according to, if you go into the Reliance of the Traveler, this here, section X229, which is the most famous, the most popular of the Islamic law manuals, right, the Sharia law manuals in the world, Malik is the keeper of hell and head of the angels of torment there. So he's the head of the demons. He's the keeper of hell and the head of the angels of torment, or the demons of torment in hell, who all receive his orders. His place in the midst of hell is connected to all parts of it by bridges which the angels of torment pass upon above its inhabitants, and he sees the furthest reaches of it as easily as he sees the closest. Just like Allah, oddly enough. You know, I'm sure there's a reference somewhere in the Quran about Allah who can see the furthest and see the closest. So now you know who Malik is, the Abd al-Malik, the slave of the Malik. This is the etymology, this is the history of the Malik. And of course the Muslims are very proud of, Abd al-Malik. So, wow, Ben Yosef, thank you very much. Wow, that's very generous and very kind. Thank you. Okay, so it looks like as Allah says Islam mentira over dad. So yeah, thank you again. I'm really grateful and very humbled. So any questions or comments, please drop them in. So let's look at Zeba and Zalmunna, so the kings of Midian. So I'll go a few more slides. So Judges 8:21, Gideon arose and killed Zeba and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of the camels. So the idea of the crescent, so now we're talking about the enemies of Yahweh. The idea of the crescent gods, right? Baal, Molech, and so on. And those who have crescents, right? They've been the enemies of the Israelites, enemies of God for a long, long time. So besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were on the necks of their camels, so the crescents are associated with camels. Yeah, I know. How can one grab a stone, carve out an idol? So, yeah. Anyway, so Midian, land or tribal league. Now, some scholars have suggested that the name Midian does not refer to a geographic place or tribe, but to a confederation or league of tribes brought together as a collective for worship. So Paul Haupt made this suggestion in 1909, describing Midian as a cultic collective. Now, this is really, really interesting. This is a fascinating idea, right? An association, or German Bund, right? A federation of different tribes in the vicinity of a sanctuary. Now, there seems to be some definite historical reason that this is true, right? That there was some kind of collective for worship reasons, where the pagans, this whole movement, this ecumenical movement, happened in that region for the purposes of worship. Now they speak of Eilat on the northern tip of the Gulf of Aqaba was suggested as the location of the first shrine, with another one at Kadesh, and they are thought to have worshipped a multitude of gods, including Baal, Peor, and the Queen of Heaven, Ashtaroth. Now we've just seen that Baal, Peor, and Ashtaroth, we've just seen them a moment ago, right? So moving on. Now, who are the enemies of Yahweh then and now? So in Psalms 83:4, we see they have said, "Come, and let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more." So these are the enemies of Israel. These are the worshippers of Baal. These are the worshippers of Molech, right? These tribes decided to wipe out the Israelites and, of course, end the worship of the God of the Bible. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, and all their princes like Zeba and Zalmunna, who said, "Let us possess for ourselves the pastures of God." So these are usurpers. These are fake gods who want the title. Who want to own the title, the power of the God of the Bible, right? The one true God. So now you've got, make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, and their princes like Zeb and Zalmunna. So wipe them out. Let us possess, who said. So this is the sin. These guys want to place other gods before the God of the Bible. There shall be no other gods before me, right? So, just give me 1 second. Okay, so now, let me see. Hi daar, broer en sis en heren. Lloyd, dankie vir jou research en dit met ons deel. Gezien 'n nuwe jaar. Gezien 'n nuwe jaar, Trevor. Baie dankie. So, let's continue. Right. Now, of course, here we've got Midian. Okay, this is modern Saudi Arabia here, so that's Midian. Right, this is the Sinai Peninsula, so this is Midian up here, and of course you've got, you're going to have Israel up here. So Saudi Arabia here, and then down here you get towards Mecca as you go south from this position, right? So this is modern Jordan here, and this is Egypt, and that's the Sinai. So let's continue. Now, Arabian and Ethiopia by C.J. Robin, the Oxford Handbook of Late Antiquity. A second question concerns the nature of Allah. Okay, was he the god of supporters of monotheism or a god of pagan origin? Now we know that there was a monotheistic movement that happened like in the 3rd and 4th centuries because of Christianity, right? But there were various competing forms of heresies as well, right? And they called God Rahman, so the Christians were known to call God Rahman. And of course we know that later on, a pagan god called Rahman also arose in competition, in opposition to this, right? So in the oldest revelations of the Quran, the name of Allah does not appear. So oddly enough, in the oldest revelations of the Quran, Allah does not appear as a name at all. When Muhammad refers to God, he says the Lord, which is a very common name in the Bible, the Lord. Or if he wants to give him a proper name, so instead of a title, the descriptor, Allah, Muhammad uses Al-Rahman, the name of the one God of the Jews and the Christians of Arabia. So the question is, Muhammad was not a Christian. Muhammad must have been a pagan, right? But he knew the name of the God of Israel, Al-Rahman. Now, but also, notice, Al-Rahman was also of the God of the followers of Musaylama. Musaylama was someone who competed with Muhammad. He was basically another prophet who made up his own religion, just like Muhammad did. So he made up his own religion, and he also worshipped Rahman. So once monotheism, once the worship of the God of the Bible became established and started to spread, people started to copy the ideas and to try to make it compatible with paganism by way of Gnosticism. Gnosticism was a way that they tried to Christianize, to make a pseudo-biblical religion out of their paganism. So, of course, Musaylama was eventually, I believe, the next caliph after Muhammad went and wiped him out. But this was not so he wasn't quite contemporary with Muhammad, but he came right after. Now, Allah is thus a God originating in polytheism, according to this paper here, right? Allah is a God originating in polytheism, Rahman, monotheistic. So it's interesting that this polytheistic name suddenly gets applied to monotheism. Inscriptions seem to confirm it. At Qaryat al-Faw, for example, Qaryat al-Faw, now that's interesting. Remember we mentioned that these Yemenis invaded, right? That we spoke of the Kindah, right? The Kindah tribe from Yemen. They invaded and they took over all of Arabia, or most of Central Arabia, right? They took over this whole region. They happened to establish a capital called Qaryat al-Faw, and Qaryat al-Faw is somewhere in this region here. Okay, so Qaryat al-Faw is somewhere here southeast of Mecca. So this was their capital, and it still exists today, and that's Qaryat al-Faw here. Right. So at Qaryat al-Faw, for example, a certain eagle entrusts the tomb he has built to Kal Allah. Ka'el, I mentioned that earlier, Ka'el, Allah, and Attar the Oriental. So notice Allah was a pagan god associated with Attar. So now you've got the pagan Allah and his consort, Attar the Oriental. The text is dated by the writing style to the beginning of the Christian era. So Allah at the beginning of the Christian era was a pagan god. Okay? And then of course Rahman was not. So notice later on they wanted to become monotheistic and therefore they stole the name Rahman. Right? So yeah, and of course when they realized the plagiarism, then they had to change the name to Allah for whatever reasons. Okay, so let's continue. I'll wind down at this point. So pre-Islamic Arabian deities. You've got Astarte, a warrior goddess of Canaan and Syria. She was the counterpart of Ishtar and worshipped in Mesopotamia. Her aggression can be seen in the bull horns she sometimes wears as a symbol of domination. Again, the bull horns is associated with Islam, right? And Astarte is a battlefield goddess. Allah is a god of war, right? Islam is religion of war. Now, let's continue. Hilal is a god of the new moon. We mentioned the Hilal. The crescent moon of Islam is called the Hilal, right? The crescent moon of Islam is called the Hilal. So Hilal is a god of the new moon, and is the moon god of Kataban from Yemen. He has the goddess Aterat as his consort. Now hold on, we just saw that Allah has the goddess Aterat as his consort. So is the moon god of Kataban from Yemen, but Allah, okay, who has the goddess Aterat as his wife, yet Allah also has the goddess Aterat as his wife. So this must be the same god. So you've got the moon god of Kataban from Yemen. So now you've got another connection here, okay? The Codex, okay, so Deuteroscopy 12 has Yahweh commanding the destruction of her shrines so as to maintain purity of his worship. So Aterat is Ashra, is Ashtaroth, is Astarte. So there we go. Hopefully this is making sense, right? Allah is just like Marte, the war god of Latins or Romans. Yeah. So basically, according to the scholarly work I've read, all of these gods, all of their attributes were rolled together into one, and they decided to call it Allah. They wanted a fresh name, one that didn't have any associations, just the God, right? So they realized so Rahman became one of the attributes of Allah. But yeah, recycled pagans, exactly. It's a mess. I mean, if you read the history of how religion was going on, these people were making it up on the fly. So the prophets of Israel warned God's people not to worship these false gods, and Kal or Hal is the moon god of the Hadramaut, Yemen, the Kindah. So let me see if I can find Karyat of Fal. Let me just see if I can actually find it. Karyat of Fal. And there we go. Yeah, I was right. It's just below this one here. Yeah, this is Karyat al-Fal. It still exists today. This was the capital of the Hadramaut, of this kingdom, of the Kindah. So yeah, these ideas were here. So next we go on to Sin was the chief god of the Hadramites. Sin. Okay, so now we've got Karyat al-Fal, Kal, Hal, Sin, same god, connected to the Semitic god Shin. So Kal, Hal, blah blah. It's all the same god. It's all just a different name. Each tribe worshipped an aspect of the god, changing the name slightly for that aspect. For instance, if you go see a church and see the Church of the Lamb, you see the Church of the Most Holy, the Church of the Most High. These are all attributes of God, right? Or attributes of Jesus. It's the same church. They're just utilizing different attributes in the name. So Talab is a moon god worshipped by the Sumai, a Sabaean tribal confederation. And the Sabaeans were the Yemenis, and of course the moon god ultimately was the moon god. There's only one moon god. Yatta, now this is interesting, is associated with salvation. Suddenly a god of salvation pops up right after the Christian entry into Arabia. So no wonder Imams try to squash Arabian history to help prop up Islam. James, yes, thank you. I hope this is making some sort of sense. That you see parallels and links and historical connections, linguistic connections, and just these links and coincidences that constantly crop up within this region. Now, a god arises called Yatta, associated with salvation. His name means savior. Okay, now who was the savior? Because there was no savior god. The moon god was not a savior god. Who brought the savior god? Well, the Christians brought the savior god. So they suddenly needed, Yatta would be linguistically related to Yasha or Yeshua, right? The tha in the Yemeni dialect probably becomes a sha in the Arabic dialect, right? These things change linguistically as you cross borders and regions. So you have Yasha. Yasha would then be a corruption of Yeshua or a contraction of Yeshua. So Yeshua is associated with salvation. That's Jesus. Understand, there's a very good probability, I believe. I mean, I think it's reasonable to make this extrapolation here. His name means savior. It's just too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence. So maybe an archaic equivalent to Yasha or Yasha, a masculine noun meaning salvation, taken from the root Yasa. We're getting closer and closer to Yeshua, Yeshua. Very small. I mean, do you guys agree with that? That this could well be that they are now plagiarizing Yeshua. They've plagiarized his father, now they plagiarize the son. And they've made a new god out of the son. Dul Khalasa is a god worshipped by the Bajila and the Katam tribes, and was reportedly worshipped as a god of redemption. Okay, that's interesting. God of redemption. Suddenly, in that period, you have the god of redemption. His temple became known as the Kaaba of Yemen. So maybe I should end here. So suddenly you've got Christianity introduced into Arabia. Rahman was the name of God. Then suddenly you've got Jesus, and now suddenly a new God pops up called Rahman, who's this new God of these these pagans. Then you've got a new God that arises called Yatha, Yeshua, Yesha, who is also one of the God of redemption of these pagans. And then suddenly Dulchalasa is a god of redemption. They didn't have these gods as far as in the pagan pantheon, right? These were war gods. These were different gods. And suddenly you've got this whole concept of this god of redemption, a god of salvation, which is very Christian, if you think about it. These are very, very Christian ideas. And his temple became known as the Kaaba of Yemen. And Muhammad obviously had the Kaaba of Yemen utterly wiped out. Because once he established his Kaaba in Mecca, supposedly he couldn't have competition. He couldn't have the old history around. And that's why all the records got wiped out. And where was that Kaaba? Now notice, remember we spoke about Haran. Okay, we spoke of Haran, that's up here, sorry, in Turkey, just across the border. Haran, this is where Abraham came from. Oddly enough, so here in Yemen, you've got this place called Hiran. Very, very similar name. Haran, Hiran. My screen is out of focus. What do you mean my screen is out of focus? My screen is perfectly focused, Ade. I'm sure it's pretty focused. It should be well focused. Let me see if that's focused. It could be that it's taking time for it to refresh in your end. I mean, I've got a very healthy connection. My internet connection seems solid. So yeah, anywho. So suddenly from Haran in Turkey, right, in southern Turkey, you've got Hiran in Yemen. And there's a place here called, which is very important later, called Al-Mahabisha. All right, Al-Mahabisha. Now, where was the original Mecca? Well, it seems the original Mecca was here in Al-Mahabisha. I've covered this before. Al-Mahabisha is the location of the original Mecca. When they speak of Ptolemy's 2nd century map, this is the place. This is the place, Hiran, in Al-Mahabisha, that Ptolemy's map points to as the location of the original Mecca, right? Mecca from the moon god Makkah, right? Because the Yemenis called that god Makkah. He was the major name of that moon god within the pantheon, Al-Mahabisha, at Haran, Hiran, okay? So that's a very, very odd coincidence that you've got this here. And of course, that was the Kaaba of Yemen, where they worshipped this Jesus-like God of redemption. So, yeah, guys, I'll lead you. Sorry. So I think I'll leave this here. I'll leave it. Actually, I'll do one more slide, but hopefully I've given you guys some food for thought. Hopefully you can see that there's something happening, and suddenly these new influences come in. All right, and then of course let's continue. Now, of course, Al-Makkah was the god, right? So now you've got the original Makkah, what's to be found there, and I'll do one more. Yatha, Yesha, Yeshu, Yeshua, Ishu, Isa. Yatha is Arabic for savior. It's a pre-Islamic god worshipped by the Sabaeans and the Himyarites of Yemen. So they adopted a new god. Okay, the pre-Islamic god worshipped by the Sabaeans, by the Yemenis. Right. 9 kings have a theophoric name prefixed by Yatha. The name may be an archaic equivalent to Yesha, which is a masculine noun meaning salvation. Strong's Hebrew 3468. It's a savior god. Okay, and that's very interesting. Suddenly a savior god comes along. A Himyaritic deity to whom, in conjunction with the other local gods, a temple was erected in Abyan by Abd Shams Aslam and his brother Martad. He was the special guardian of the town of Aden, and his analog was the Chaldean divinity Salman. Salman, Eslem, is the root of the word Islam. Just so you know, the Chaldean divinity Salman. So they were trying to blend these religions together. That's why Islam is such a mishmash, because Salim is the root of Islam. Salim, in its earliest historical usage, was a reference to the star god Shalem. So guys, I'll end here. And Allah is from the Hebrew Eliloah is one of the Jewish names of God. Allah is a pun on both that Hebrew name and Allah. Something like that. And yeah, it's a complete mess. So Petra is the initial Mecca. Not necessarily. It's in the south. They worshipped similar religions at different times, different places. There was certainly a connection to Petra, certainly, because Muhammad worshipped the gods Alat, Manat, and Al Uzza at one time as well. Right? We have that in the Islamic record as well. That's in their own records, and of course they were worshipped in Petra. Right? So they basically these things just traveled across all the time. And people were borrowing and choosing and picking and making and whatnot. But a lot was happening, a lot originated in the south. So no wonder the ear is all over the place. That it is. Yeah, it's a huge mess to put together, but I just want to present this to you, and like you guys can make up your own minds what this may or may not mean. So yeah, guys, thank you. So thank you guys very much for the generous support. Thank you for being here. Let me see how many. Um, wow, great, over 60 people. So thank you very much. I hope this was enlightening. I'll have another one soon. I'll have one in a few days. This week is still fairly quiet for me, so maybe I'll do this again tomorrow. Let's see. But thank you very much. And I have a new series that I just debuted on Reasoned Answers channel before I do it here. So guys, hopefully you've learned a lot. Hopefully this is stuff that you can use. And yeah, I need to think about turning this into a book or something. So thanks, guys. Have a wonderful evening. Have a great start to the new year. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. Stay safe. And I will be certain to see you guys soon. Thank you very, very much. How many books did I read? All of them. Good grief. Take care, guys, and thank you. Please drop your questions in the comments if there are any. And for those who want to reach out to me, yep. By the way, yeah, let me just, because people do ask me all the time. Let me just go to YouTube. Just go to my, because I know a couple of people reached out to me recently. So this is my channel here. And if you go to the About page, if you go to my page, go to the About page and you click here, it says for business inquiries, it says sign in to see email address. If you are signed in and you click over here, right? So for business, so it says here, so you can click this and it'll give you an email address you can meet me on, right? If you so just go to the About page here, but you have to do it from a computer, from a laptop. It doesn't work, I believe, on a phone or tablet. All right, so let's see, very informative. I'd buy the book. Good night. So yeah, thank you guys all, and we shall hopefully see you soon. And take care. What that dude called Muhammad Salam Salam. Yeah, I mean, drop the notes in the comments because that'll be interesting to know more about. Because some of you will know things about this that I don't. Isa is Safayitic, means redeemer. Yes, in fact, the earliest record, the earliest mention of, I published this on my channel like 6 months ago, where the very earliest reference to Isa is actually in Safayitic. And it's actually an inscription on a rock by a Christian who calls Jesus Isa in the Safayitic. And it's a prayer for a dead uncle of his. He's mourning a dead uncle. Stay away from Russian missiles. Yeah, you know, that's always something you have to, you know, never a boring day. It's very hard to read so many books in English. English is not my native language, so you have to read many books. Look, as I said, I use the software. I don't have to read everything. I can find the references and I read what is relevant. You know, so I use the software to search through things. So if I need to find something, if I look up the word Safayitic, there we go. I've got 40 documents that reference Safayitic. The very first one is, let's have a look here. The very first one is the Anchor Bible Dictionary. And let's go and see what it says to us. And they mention inscriptions, Safayitic, which is fantastic. And then I can go to the next one. So the Brill Encyclopaedia of the Quran, 6 volumes. And that's the next mention of Safayitic. And let's wait for it to load because it's a huge volume. 46 megabytes with over 3,000 pages. It'll take a while. But anyway, this is how I find things. And then I read the relevant sections. And then I see if there's anything I can cross-reference. So there we go. That's it. So, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without you guys. So guys, I've been saying good night for a while. Have a wonderful night, guys. Take care. Thank you. Goodbye.